Well, John, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be here.
Do you want to just give us a little bit of background about where your journey started and sort of how it got to where you are now with AgriWebb, and just a bit of background in your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess like all things, I've sort of always been a bit of an entrepreneur at heart. Um, but my roots and where I actually grew up on a farm
Yep.
in regional South Australia, fifth generation farmer out there. So grew up with rolled up the sleeves and following the footsteps of my father and grandfather, and became very passionate about agriculture and more particularly, passionate about innovation, technology. How can we do things better? And, going back, looking at what we did in previous generations, we have a large outback station, 400,000 acres. So to do anything takes a lot of time and effort. You go back in the 50s and 60s, we had a staff of 40 all on horseback. And with the evolution of technology and innovation, the motorbike came in, and eventually, Cessna came in call it the late 70s. So what took kind of a month could now take a couple of hours, right? And what took 40 staff is now down to 2 staff, right? Or the family could run it on its own. So quite dramatic transformational changes in those decades. When I sat back and really looked at what had really shifted in more of my generation, call it the last 10, 20, 30 years, we didn't see the same step changes, right? We were still doing the same sorts of things in terms of taking, hours to days to check stock watering points. We were still making decisions from a generational perspective, the way we'd always made decisions on the farm. And we were still ultimately, using a pencil and paper notebook, at best a spreadsheet, to kind of make forward based business decisions. So that led me to go, right, well, let's have a look at some software. We did look at software. We actually bought some about 20 odd years ago, and it came in a floppy disk and stayed that way in the top drawer of the office, right? So that was really opened my eyes to being like, right, this industry in terms of agriculture as it stands is the least digitized industry in the world. And when we look at livestock agriculture, and what I mean by that is call it sheep and cattle farmers, is the least digitized of agriculture. So that's really kind of my upbringing, and was very passionate about sort of driving change, not just for our family business, but as a whole industry. I mean, we're looking at a multi-trillion-dollar industry that's ultimately run off the back of a pencil and paper notebook globally,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So with that comes lots of problems, but also comes lots and lots of opportunities. And so that was my burning passion, burning desire. I went off and did other things professionally. Actually, I'm a lawyer by background. Not probably because I wanted to become a lawyer. It was more around I wanted some kind of professional degree behind me, and wanted to learn, a good chunk of skills that could be applicable across multiple areas, but really business. So through university, I mentioned I was entrepreneurial. I did a bunch of little side hustles and all those types of things, and then went off to London. I was in London for about 4 years, doing a few different bits and pieces, but I ended up doing some kind of legal and commercial work in a technology-based retail company, which gave me sort of my first experience into enterprise software, SaaS software,
Yep.
commercializing software, those types of components. And then I ultimately met the other 2 founders. So there's 3 co-founders at AgriWebb, and we got together in 2014, and I moved back to Australia then, and then we founded AgriWebb to get things off the ground.
Yeah. And so the agricultural side of things and business was your passion. What what was the deciding factor where you've sort of gone, I want to go down this path with software business rather than sort of working on the farm or doing something um, directly related to the farm itself, you know?
Yeah, good question. So, we'd been on the land for generations. As I mentioned, basically 5 generations, and my parents were always very encouraging of going and doing something else, experiencing something else, and if we eventually came back to the family farm, even better.
Yep.
But really, really opening your eyes up, having a look around, having a look at the world, and encouraged, education and travel and those types of things. So that was always kind of a big part of growing up was, make sure you go and have a look at the world because, hey, the farms, provided things are going okay, the farm's going to be here for you. And, I've got an older brother if you want that. So
Yeah.
that kind of gave a bit of a weight off the shoulders, particularly in farming families. Sometimes you don't get that opportunity where there's a deep expectation that you're just going to come back to the farm. And, as I said, still very passionate about the industry and still got a very close connection to the family farm. And one day, I'm still see a world where I get very actively involved in the family farm, but I've just got aspirations from a business perspective, that reach above and beyond the farming business.
Yeah. So, and in terms of the business that you've co-founded with the other two, they've both got farming backgrounds as well, I assume.
Yeah. So one of our co-founders, Justin Webb, has a family farm as well, very similar to my story, except he didn't grow up on the farm like I did.
Yep.
He grew up in a world. Actually, he describes himself as more of a math geek than a farmer. But
Right.
ultimately, his father was a multi-generational farmer, and Justin had come back to his family farm to make some decisions when his father got ill. And he was sitting around the kitchen table. He has a finance background, and he was like,
Yep.
"Great, like you're asking me to make some pretty big decisions around some inputs and some costs." So he started asking questions around, well, what sort of return can we expect? And hey, where's the data? All these types of questions. And of course, it was sort of a blank face across the table, which was, oh no, like this is the way we've always done that. So for Justin, it was, there's got to be a better way here. I wonder if there's some software out there. Very similar kind of discovery process of actually that there's no software. I wonder if there's an opportunity. He himself is very entrepreneurial. He's built and sold 3 or 4 businesses in the finance space. And
Okay.
so this for him was bringing together 2 worlds of entrepreneurship, building businesses, but also some roots into farming. Our third co-founder, Kevin Baum, has actually no ag background at all. American guy, and he sort of grew up in Silicon Valley, basically did undergrad through Stanford. He grew up with a bunch of his peers that were going off. This was kind of when Facebook and Twitter and the big social companies were
Yeah.
getting off the ground. So his cohort were going off into these sorts of environments. And he had those opportunities as well. But the way he describes that is, I want to do something sort of more real and impactful with my life, and sharing pictures with my teenage mates at the time didn't get him out of bed. What
Yeah.
got him out of bed was real industries, energy, infrastructure, food, those types of industries. So he went off doing some consulting into energy, and then Justin and Kevin actually met together when they were doing their MBA over in the UK. So they did an MBA over at Oxford, and decided they wanted to do something entrepreneurial. Then this sort of aha moment popped out of the woodwork of, hey, maybe there's an opportunity in agriculture. Maybe, the original and most important industry, arguably for humanity, being agriculture and food.
Mhm.
Hey, it's the least digitized industry in the world, and actually one of the most important. That's pretty impactful. We can get out of bed for that. Let's do something about it.
Yeah.
And so that's how all of our worlds came together. One of those scenarios where I got introduced to the 2 of them over a beer in London when they'd actually moved back to Australia. And we got on a couple of Skype chats. And this was before Zoom was around in
Yeah.
2014. We decided we were gonna kick this off and solve all the problems of the world. And I then resigned from my job in London and convinced my now wife to resign from her job in London. She's a lawyer as well, so we had very good jobs, and we resigned and got on a plane without actually meeting Justin and Kevin face to face. And
Oh, really?
everyone's like, you're crazy. What are you doing? And you realize this could fail or this could go nowhere. You guys are leaving your successful kind of start of your successful career here in London. And that was the start of it. So we jumped on a plane, set up in a garage in Melbourne,
Yeah. Right.
Melbourne, Australia, and we've never looked back. But most people thought we were crazy at the time.
But it's funny, isn't it? Because that's all comes down to perception. And obviously, you've looked at it weighed up the pros and cons and decided that, well, this is a reasonable risk to take. If it doesn't work out, presumably you can just fly back and get jobs doing what you were doing before. It's people don't think like that generally, though. I mean, that's presumably how you looked at it from a risk management point of view, but a lot of people think that's a pretty dramatic thing to do.
Yeah, that's bang on. It is basically a risk management assessment of risk at the time. And at the end of the day, there'll be plenty of legal jobs out there, right? That's not going away. And so what was the worst that was going to happen? We weren't successful, or we didn't get to where we wanted to get to. Our fallback was you'd go back to what we were doing previously. But the opportunity, the upside was so huge, right? I mean, the new skills, the new opportunities, even if AgriWebb, wasn't as successful as it is now, or we didn't kind of achieve our goals, those opportunities and life skills are with you forever. And and also, it's you only get one crack at it, right? So if you've got an itch, you should go and scratch it, because you don't want to look.
100% true. Yep.
You don't want to look back and wonder what if. And the other thing is, people in professional careers, law being one of them, not the only one, the further you continue and progress in that career, the harder it is for people to leave. And so, if people are very happy in that said profession, great. But if people have an itch they want to scratch, you've got to get on with it, because the further you get down that path, the harder it is to make a call to jump.
Yeah, 100%. If there's something that you want to have a go at, just do it, and it'll work itself out. And at the worst case scenario, you've got great experience, and
Absolutely.
you learn from it and you move forward. But none of that stuff's going to kill you. But you get the experience from it. It's priceless, and I don't think enough people put it in that perspective sometimes to just have a go. And even parents, as parents of adult kids and that sort of stuff who are coming through, it's easy to sort of say take the safe route, but if you want to try something, just go for it and see what happens, and don't die wondering.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned parenting there. I think that's a great example. Again, my parents were always very encouraging of going and trying, exploring new things. And as farmers, they're risk takers, they're innovators.
Yeah.
They have to roll up the sleeves and do everything themselves. So that's kind of been in my upbringing and in my blood as well, as, hey, we've got to figure this out. And I think that is a great spirit to take on or to have as part of how you think about life.
And how do you find that with the going to your customers who are obviously farmers and station owners, and you're talking to them, you've got the background, because they can sometimes be extremely innovative, but they can also be very stubborn sometimes in terms of how they do things. So how do you assuming that's right, but that's been my experience, they can be the most innovative and creative people when it comes to solving problems, but they can also be very stuck in their ways sometimes. How do you go managing that sort of issue, and is it an issue?
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? Everyone sort of asks this question around, and you are right. Our software is designed and built for farmers. So we sell our software to livestock farmers in Australia and globally. We have about 16,000 farmers use our platform. About 25% of all of the animals in Australia are on our platform.
Yeah, right.
But from the day we got our first customer to the customers we continue to bring on every day, ultimately it comes down to change management, and it's not just about farmers, right? People don't like change, and people are just stuck in their ways, and it just so happens that can be accelerated, or that can be concentrated, I guess, in a farming environment, because we're trying to sell a software product, and farmers don't sit in front of a computer every day, right? They're out farming, and they have limited time to come home and use and interact on a computer with software tools. So that then, we need to think about the way farmers think, so that's when we built our software, which we do all ourselves. We build it all in-house. It's, making it simple and easy, making it on their mobile phone, right? Making it work offline, so that they can interact, in an environment that they're working in, right? Sitting in the ute, sitting on a horse, on the motorbike, whatever it might be.
Yep.
and overcoming the challenges of taking on technology. Yes, we have a scenario where, look, the average age of farms in Australia is 58 or 56 or something like that. So
Right.
there's a bit of an age barrier. Um, but actually, it's not fair to always say, oh, farmers just don't adopt technology. Often we see it's the opposite, right?
Yeah.
They're very
Yep.
innovative. They're very willing to give something a go. They're risk takers. And so that provides a great opportunity to really get involved. And, I think the biggest challenge becomes that change management, right? It becomes taking people from what they were doing to something new. And we
Yep.
see this all the time. We meet other founders and other leaders of businesses, and we talk about the challenges, and we say, oh, selling software to farmers is the hardest sector to be in. Adoption slow, all those types of things. And someone in the medical industry, in med tech, if you want to call it that, says,
Yeah.
hey,
Yep.
if you think
Yep.
selling to farmers would be hard, try selling to doctors, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
And then
Good point.
you go through sector by sector, and you're like, yeah, it's just hard, isn't it? Right. And it just
Yeah.
comes down to change management ultimately.
Yeah.
And people as human beings don't like change. So
Yep.
then you need to take on ways of opening people's eyes of, how it can make their life easier, can make more money, et cetera, et cetera.
And really, there you're just talking about the user experience, aren't you? And where you say they're going to be in the ute or they're going to be wherever, you just got to make the technology applicable and make the user case or the user experience, I should say, as seamless as possible.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, no one wants to make anyone's life harder, right?
Yeah.
So we've
Yeah.
got to make someone's life easier, and there's got to be a value proposition or a benefit at the other end. And so, that's kind of the key to it.
And in terms of the business, as you've gone along, you've had business experience before, and it sounds like the other founders have as well. How did that go when you first started the business in terms of your strengths and weaknesses? And how did they complement with the other founders?
Yeah, yeah, great question and topic. It's so I guess from my perspective, I grew up on a farm, professional background in law and a few other bits and pieces thrown in there. Um, Justin, professional background off a farm or farming family, professional background in financing, building businesses, and Kevin, background in commercializing technology,
Yep.
and really um, understanding and taking on best practices around SaaS, software as a service, and building
Yep.
business off the back of best practices. Interestingly, though, in the mix of those of three founders, no actual technical person. So normally, if you go into a software company or a technology company in a founding cohort, you're going to get a CTO, chief technology officer, or
Yep.
a chief product officer that's going to bring that technical capability. So often that's like, oh, interesting. There's no technical founder in there. So that was one area of, is that necessarily a weakness or not in the cohort, in the three of us? And
Yeah.
that, as the story goes, I mentioned before how we all met over Skype and kind of quit my job without meeting each other. At that point in time, before Justin and Kevin had met me, they were looking for a technical person to join the team, right? They were
Okay.
effectively
Right.
looking for a technical founder. And the mutual friend that connected us sent my CV across, and, they're like, what the hell do we need with a lawyer? We're after a software developer, right?
Yeah. Right.
So that's kind of how that discussion went. And then when we got together, we just gelled, and we just knew that there was an opportunity here. I guess, we then went on to hire a CTO and bring in
Yep.
great technical talent that are still with us today, that are part of, that early cohort, the early handful of folk that we have in the business. We've gone on now, I think there's over 70 people in the business now, but in
Yeah.
those
Okay.
in those early days. And I guess, my strengths in this were, I've always been customer facing, right?
Yep.
So whether it be, finding our first customer, whether it be working through, challenges around what product to build and designing the product, to supporting our customers, to working how to market our customers, to working how to scale um, our processes, scaling our teams, running teams. I've always been focused on that go-to-market side. And my strengths in that have been, I've I come with a farming background, so I get it, and I know the
Yeah.
problems we're
Yep.
trying to solve, and I can, strongly relate to our customer base. And I spent many, many years of those early of those early that early time driving down driveways, having cups of tea across
Yep.
the table, and I can't um, reinforce how important it is in any business,
Yep.
particularly in those early days, to really understand who your target customer is, to understand what problems they're facing, to understand, what some of those solutions might be. So many times there's effectively a solution that's created to try and solve a problem that doesn't exist.
Yep.
And then you wonder why you can't sell it, or you wonder
Yep.
why people don't want your product. And so, we just spent a lot of time doing that, and so important in really building that trust, building that integrity. And then of course you've got to figure out how to scale that, right?
Yep.
But
Yep.
my strength in that was really building relationships, having trust, having integrity, um, you know, finding people you want to work with and reciprocating that. And then in terms of, it's hard to start businesses. It's hard to get them off the ground. Those early months and
Yep.
years are so critical. And that's why, unfortunately, a lot of small businesses fail. You know, whatever it is, you probably know the stats,
Yeah.
95% in the first few years.
First
Um,
5 years. Yeah. Yep.
and you need to be, you know, you need to be tenacious, right? You need to have tenacity. You need to be creative. You need to be curious. Um, and, you need to get your hands dirty, right? And so all of those things is really, I guess, kind of my core strengths, which then, become the framework of how you build this out. And ultimately, in my role is ultimately heavily focused on sales. I now run a lot of
Yep.
our enterprise business, which is not selling direct to farmers. It's more around data and bringing
Okay.
in groups in the value chain. And so, I guess that's what I do from a day to day basis. And I didn't get taught any of that. Like
Yep.
I didn't go through and have a profession in sales or product development or anything like that. It was learning on the go, learning from people, getting your hands dirty, and I guess that's
Yep.
kind of how I'd wrap my strengths up.
And when you talk about understanding the problem or understanding the customer and all those types of things, you're really talking about conversations, right? I mean, I know that's probably pretty obvious, but in terms of, you hear people say those sorts of things, that you need to understand the problem, but it's not, it goes beyond understanding the problem. To understand the problem, you've really got to do what you were talking about, which was having those cups of teas with people and just really drilling down into those conversations. Is that fair to say?
I Yeah, I think that's bang on. I heard this the other day from our chief people officer, and I think it's absolutely correct. A lot of people say, "Oh, relationships effectively make businesses successful,"
Yeah.
and it's actually not relationships; it's conversations,
Mm.
right? So it's conversations that build relationships that make companies successful. And then there's a whole theory for your listening base to look up is crucial conversations, some great content, great education around that can help people in all walks of life, whether it's conversations at home or whether it's conversations in a workplace or beyond. And that really rings true to me, which is really around getting the most out of those conversations. Again, whether it be peers, whether it be potential customers or clients or prospects. And a big component of that is active listening, right? Is the art of negotiation in helping people get to mutual goals. And I think that's a big part of it. Being curious, asking lots of questions, building lots of trust, so people want to open up to you and give you lots of gold along the way.
Yeah, that's massively underrated, right? In terms of any industry, if you want to understand stuff, you've really got to talk to people, and sometimes it's clumsy and clunky or whatever it might be, but they're the real genuine conversations where you go, oh, okay, I didn't realize that. Now I get it, or whatever it might be. Like those conversations really matter around any topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually caring about an answer of what someone has to say. So often I see and hear people not actually listening to what you've said, Dion, or others, and I'm just ready for my response. And actually,
Yeah.
I haven't heard what you've said, and I haven't been active in responding and digging into that. And so, I've failed to build trust and rapport, and then I've failed to actually get to the heart of the issue because I've just got an agenda over here that I'm trying to drive.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, was there, as you built the business, or in the early days, was there, you've got the idea, you think it's got legs and there's some potential there. Was there a moment where, whether it was with a customer or was with the sale, or where you sort of thought, oh, really does have legs. This is what we thought it would be. Was there a moment there where you sort of,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, okay,
Absolutely. Like all these things, you kick them off, and what you say you're going to do initially changes over time and morphs into
yep,
something else. Of course, I mean, we had this grand strategy originally of trying to do a whole bunch of things, software being a component of that, but there are other components, and now we've really narrowed in on software and what we do and what we do best, and we're the global leader of that now. But um, in those early days before you have customers, before you've really got a product, you're kind of sitting there being like, is this going to work? And do people have
mm,
what we want? And there is one very specific moment in time. Um, well, there's two, but the first one is impactful. And so I'll respond by this. It was our very first customer that joined us. And as I mentioned, we'd spent lots of time driving down driveways, having cups of tea,
yeah,
understanding problems, going through product iterations and getting feedback. And this one guy we'd worked with based in regional Victoria, right, a couple of hours out of Melbourne, and he had found us in the early days when we hardly even had a website, right? So there was no marketing, there was no actual efforts to get our website out in front of everyone, and he'd still found us. And
right,
he put a contact form in saying, "Hey, I'm interested in this software." So anyway, we got in contact with this guy and said, "Look, how did he find us?" But we said, "Yep, great." We worked with this guy for a few months actually, and we got product in hand and gave us a bunch of feedback, and we got to know his family and his kids and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, after a few months, he invited us back to his farm, and we got to a point where this was going to be our first customer, right? Or what we thought he was going to buy our software. And we're like, this is it. So Kevin and I and the other co-founders, we were driving down to meet James, and we were going along. And for those not from a farming background that's going to be listening to this, we're driving along the main highway, and onto that was his driveway to the farmhouse,
yeah,
right? And every time we had been and visited James and his family at this point, we'd gone into the house and we'd had cups of tea and all this sort of stuff. On this day, which we were driving down where we thought we were going to make a sale, James was parked in his ute on the highway, right at the end of his driveway.
right,
This is not a good sign, right? This is not a
yeah,
good sign. Dion, you're from a regional background originally. You already know what's happening here,
yeah. This doesn't sound
right?
good.
No. So I said to Kevin, Kevin, this is not good. And he goes, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, every other time we've visited James, we've had a cup of tea over the kitchen table. It's been great.
Yeah,
The fact that he's at the end of his driveway means I don't think we're going to get a sale today.
yeah. And you're not
um,
getting a cup of tea either.
we're not getting a cup of tea either for our 2.5 hour drive. So sure enough, we kicked the dust around the gate of his driveway, and he said to us, he said, "Lads, look, it's not right for me. I'm not going to buy it." And we said, well, why not? And look, he listed off all these things of the features it didn't have, right?
Yeah,
And we said, yep, righto, no worries. So we drove back to Melbourne. It was on a Friday, and we basically didn't speak to each other, Kevin and I, in the car, because we were so rattled, right? We were
yeah,
like, it's over. If this guy has found our website, which can't be found, he's made the effort to contact us. He spent months with us on product iterations and product feedback. And if he is not going to buy it, who's going to buy it?
right,
Like how are we ever going to, clearly we don't have something that people are interested in. So that was on a Friday. It was a dark afternoon. Anyway, I came back in on Monday when I said, Kevin, I'm going to call him. I'm going to call James, and I'm going to see if he's changed his mind. Had a discussion of, what's the point? Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, gets back to, I guess me being tenacious and never saying no,
yeah,
or never taking no for an answer. And I called him and I said, James, look, I know you said you weren't going to buy it, but I just wanted to call you back to see if you've changed your mind. And ultimately, I just want to hear from you. And he said, you know what, John, I have changed my mind. I am going to buy your software. And at this point, I was like shocked and surprised and
Yeah.
excited. And I was like, Gavin, we've got this, our first customer. And he said, you know what? It still doesn't do all the things I want it to do. It still doesn't solve all my problems. But if people like me don't believe in people like you, this industry will never go anywhere. Right.
Yeah, right.
And if people like me don't invest in companies like you, this industry will never go anywhere. And
Yeah.
so at that particular moment in time, we said, we've got something here, right?
Yeah.
We've got enough here that we can iterate on. We have got a very impactful vision that we're trying to execute upon. And that's what we're going to leverage, right? And it was that moment in time that gave us the confidence to say, yes, we are on something here. And this is what we're going to do. And this is how we're going to run at it. So that was the moment in time, right? That was
That's
the absolute
incredible.
moment in time.
Yeah, that's an awesome story. I mean, and the fact that you would have been easy not to have called. I mean,
Correct.
many people wouldn't have. I mean, I think I would probably be like yourself. I would just want to make that extra call just to find out for sure or just to see. But plenty of people would just be like, oh, well, he's a no and move on. Sounded like he might have been going to call you anyway. So,
Yeah,
but
I mean,
you never know though, right?
absolutely. And, early days of businesses, you got to pick up the phone. You got to make that phone call. You got to make that one too many phone calls. It gets a bit awkward. You have to do it, right? And if you don't, you're not asking enough questions. You're not being curious. You're not learning enough, and you're not going to hear what's actually happening from your market. There's one other moment in time that really stands out, and it's a quick story. But because we are a SaaS software company, it's a subscription, monthly or annual based fee. That's our model. In that first year, when we were finding our early customers and they were signing up to a year plan, there was a critical moment in time of, do we have something valuable or not, on the basis of, will they renew? Will they renew for the next 12 months? Because I just mentioned before that it gave us the confidence to sell the vision and the dream and the vision, right?
Yeah.
But when rubber hits the road and a customer's got to put their hand in their pocket again for the next year, are they getting value? That was the next moment in time, right? And we had an unbelievable renewal rate, right? Our churn rate was hardly was non-existent, and still to this day, right? Still to this day, our churn rate is 0.8%, is under 1%.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's extremely good.
So we know that when we take people through change management, we've got a very sticky and loyal customer base that are getting a lot of value.
But until you see that, and after that first year, you don't know, do you? And you're quite right. A lot of people will give you a go, but that doesn't mean anything necessarily until they renew. So that would have been a critical time.
The critical thing for that in early stages for people is, you've got to support your customers and make them successful, right? Yeah. So it's one thing to find them and get them to buy your product, whatever that is, regardless of whether you have a renewing subscription-based product and company or not, right? Yep. Because you need those early customers, those early evangelists, right? You need them to refer business. You need them for case studies. They are the heart and soul of your company, right? Yep. And so you can't forget that. And, I still see a lot of businesses today that don't focus on the success of their customers enough. And there's so many easy ways of doing that, which generates business for you later, right? And there's just so many simple things. Set up email EDMs, right? Mm-hmm. Call your customers and see how they're going. Ask for referrals. Ask for case studies. Give them something in return. These are basic things that people are often not doing. They're just chasing the new customer every single time. And you're forgetting about the most powerful thing in your business, which you have, which is your current customer base. Again, whether you're selling a one-off widget or an ongoing subscription model.
Yep.
And I say this to our team all the time that are having thousands of conversations with our customers all the time, right? Not to just be very reactive, be very proactive, be curious,
Mm.
learn
Yep.
something, right? And there will be mutual gain for our customer. There'll be mutual gain as you as an individual to learn something, and there'll be mutual gain for you as a company to have an opportunity that may not have existed if you weren't curious and you didn't ask those questions.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? Just the simple stuff like having those conversations, calling the customer, those sorts of things. Often, if I have someone come across and join me from an investment perspective, they've got a portfolio, they're with a big firm or whatever it might be. Often the comments are around no one called them or they didn't hear from people, and the sort of fees that they're paying and the amount of money they've got, you would just expect
Mm.
that would be not the case, and it's just incredible but it's across every industry. People just get comfortable sometimes and they don't
Yeah,
call the customer. It's
absolutely.
business 101, right?
Well, it should be.
Should be, yeah, exactly. Now, and in terms of the best decision you made along the way with the business, what's something that stands out as one of the key things that you worked out early?
I mean, I think we continually need to make this decision, but it's around focus, driving
Yep.
focus, right? I mean, I mentioned earlier that we were trying to ultimately when we started with this big vision and strategy, and we were ultimately creating a hardware company, a software company, and an e-commerce company. And there were three of us in a garage, right?
Yep.
And to look back, you're like, that's just completely crazy. Why were you doing that? It's like, because we were trying to get over here and we thought we needed all these pieces, and we eventually ended up focusing purely on software. But
Yep.
it's so easy to go outside of the core or jump at an opportunity or take something on. And you've just got to remain focused. You've got to drive focus. And I remember this one advisor a while ago. We did one of the accelerators. His big thing, he was called Mr. Focus. He had this word focus on his iPhone. He'd stick it on his forehead every time
Yep.
someone said something that was deviating. It'd be like bang. And
This is
it's
probably
just so important.
is his name Mick?
Yeah, Mick. He's been on your podcast.
He's been on the show a couple of times. Yeah, yep.
Yep,
That
yep,
would be
Mr.
Mr.
Focus.
Focus. Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So
But it's true, right?
yeah, it is true. So I think that's one thing time and time again, very difficult to do because,
Yeah,
you need to also be getting new opportunities and moving the business forward, and you can't stagnate. Um,
yeah.
but really just focusing on what's important, focusing on the core as an overarching piece, definitely.
And how do you do that in terms of it's easy to say you focus on the core. What are the um, systems or the principles you've got in place that help you just come back to that within the business and individually? I guess. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you can set up a whole bunch of different frameworks and ways to think about it, but you need to think about who your core customer is, right?
Yep.
What your core product is, why you're getting out of bed, why your team's getting out of bed, and do all things lead to that bigger picture that's implanted on the wall or
Yep.
whatever you're running at. And so, I think thinking about it like that, is this right for our core customer? Is this right for our team? Is this right for our company? And I say that knowing that sometimes you do need to take on things that may be outside of the core focus to get to another point in time. A prime example is raising money, right? If
Yep.
you're going down a path where you're raising money, and at AgriWebb, we have raised a number of rounds of funding through venture and family offices and alike. And
Yep.
sometimes you might go and take on, a new segment or open a new geography, or I'm talking about quite major things here, which you
Hmm.
might think is like, well, that doesn't sound like you're focusing, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
you might need to take a visionary step. You might need to step out of your comfort zone. So you can't be dogmatic about it, but you need to be thinking about if you're going to step outside, like why are you doing that, and what is that going to lead to?
Yeah. And now I think I've read you guys raised about 30 or 40 million over the last year or two. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think over the years, it's probably north of that now. We've raised a
Yeah.
number of rounds and some
Okay.
extension rounds and those types of things.
Yeah.
But that is true. We've raised a good chunk of money along the way. Yeah.
And is that the process around that is you want to accelerate the and scale up the business as quickly as possible? Is this from a global perspective? Do you have a footprint in other countries, or is it really just Australia at this point?
Yeah, all of the above. So we have offices head offices in Sydney, but we have offices in London, in the UK, and in Denver in the US.
Yep.
So there are 3 hubs where we've got people based. There are kind of 3 core geographies, but we do have customers in 18 countries now.
Okay.
And we've just launched, as of this week, actually, we're just launching down in Brazil with a strategic partner down in Brazil. So we have a global presence. We have some regional BDMs in South Africa as well. So we absolutely are a global business, global reach. So, raising money has been around scaling globally, investing in growth. And we've made that decision from day one. So, rather than growing organically, we've wanted to invest in scaling up. We do everything in-house. So, the whole life cycle of our business is in-house. It's go-to-market teams, product and engineering, et cetera. And it's expensive to get that off the ground. It's expensive to enter new geographies. And, we're taking right from day one, we wanted to have impact at scale. We wanted to have impact globally in core regions to do that. So that's largely what it's been around, to invest in people. But as a software business, the majority of our cost base is people related.
Yeah. John, what would you say the best advice you've been given along the way has been?
Well, look, I think we've spoken a bit about how important I think it is around conversations that are around rolling up the sleeves and getting your hands dirty and really understanding the problem and building a solution for those problems. We've spoken about that. But in line with what we've just spoken around in terms of raising capital, one of our advisors, he's been with us a long time, he's a good friend, dear friend now. And he said not that long ago, he's like, you need to survive, right? Survivability. And it was in the mix of, what's been happening in the last 12, 18 months around, the financial climate, right? And how critical and how important it is to survive. And you need to do whatever it takes to survive, right? Don't be another one of those statistics of where it hasn't ended well. And so that really rang true around, don't underestimate it, right? And it may sound obvious, but take a step back and think about that, right? What does it mean if you can't raise another round of funding? What does it mean if you can't close that pipeline that you're thinking about? What does it mean if your sales targets are not going to come through by an external factor that's out of your control? So for me, that would be one thing pretty impactful, to take a step back and be like, okay, and what comes from that is, what's your plan A, B, and C, and those types of things, and what are the risk factors, and what are the things outside of your control? But that would be one piece.
Well, it's just having cash too, right? I mean, that part of the ability to survive is having cash, and that's probably not so much now. I think everyone's sort of working out that this is a big deal, is to have that cash. But go back 2 years ago, when it was very easy to raise money or get money whenever you needed, and anyone could get it. Different ball game now, right?
Exactly.
Completely different ball game.
Completely.
So that's very good advice. All right, I've got final 4 quick questions to run through. Who's a business person that inspires you the most, and why?
Well, you know what? I'm going to say the same person, because your listening base probably has a lot of the high profile folk that people have always heard of. But one of our advisors that helps business and personal and everything, is a great friend now, is a guy called Steve Schramm.
Right.
He has built and sold and founded about 8 companies now. He's out of Silicon Valley. He's been a CEO a number of times, and he is so influential because he's worn so many different hats, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Software development, business, CEO, sales, And so you can pretty much ask him anything and he will give you some amazing nuggets and advice to
Yeah.
go on your journey with. And for those interested, there's an amazing documentary called General Magic.
Okay.
So for everyone out there, go and Google General Magic, watch the documentary. Steve was one of the executives in that. He's actually in the
Okay.
documentary as well. It was effectively, General Magic was the company that basically was well before its time, before iPhone, before Android, before eBay, before the internet. And these guys were trying to create the smartphone before any of that existed.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it's really this unknown story and unknown company that back in the day raised enormous amounts of money, had all the talent in the world, and they were just too early. But the
Yeah. Okay.
people
Yeah.
in that company all went off, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yep.
founder of eBay, founder and creator of iPhone and iPod, founder of Android, all came out of this company. So I recommend go
Yep.
and Google General Magic, watch the documentary, and you will not be disappointed.
I will have to get that put in the show notes as well, because that sounds like it's well worth watching.
Absolutely.
Good recommendation. What about business books? Any particular business books that you resonate
Yeah,
with you over time?
look, I love reading founder stories and founder books. I love all that stuff. Shoe Dog, on
Yep.
Nike, those. I just love those stories because there's so much gold in there that that I can really get behind. But one I really enjoy is a book called Never Split the Difference
Yep.
by Chris Boss. And really, I mean, this was his journey around being a lead negotiator through the FBI, and it tells great stories around high stakes negotiations and really the theory and practices that come out of that you can apply in everyday life, that you can apply in business, that you can apply in sales environments, is really, really powerful. And a lot of the playbooks and methodologies that we've created internally, there's a lot that have come from that. And it's just a great
Okay.
read.
Yeah.
So I would say it's that.
Okay. Good one. What about a favorite quote on life or business or leadership?
Yeah. My favorite quote, and I don't want to be quoting myself. I'm not saying that I don't know where I got this from. Maybe
Yep.
I've used it so much now that I either created it or I got it from somewhere else. I don't know, but everyone in our company knows this quote and knows me for it. And it's basically a lot of what we've talked about during the
Yep.
time just now. It's don't ask, don't get.
Yeah.
Simple as that, right?
Simple. Yeah. Yep.
Ask, you don't know, right? What's the
Yep.
worst that's going to happen? And so that there, we've got that hashtag that's part of my persona. And people, even very senior people, say, you know what, one person that's just left our business to go and explore other opportunities. Great, she's awesome. And I said to her, I was like, oh, what's some things that you've taken away from working at AgriWebb? And she's like, yeah, one thing I just taken with me, and it's just amazing what can come from it, is don't ask, don't get.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's
No, but I think that's brilliant. I mean, because it's so simple, so easy to
Yep.
remember, but it's so profound at the same time. And I can imagine that even within the organization, that it actually influences the way your staff and your people think.
Yeah.
Even, I can think of other businesses where they might want to talk to the founders about something, but if you've got that as your primary focus, don't ask, don't get, well, you're much more encouraged to, or empowered to ask those questions and see what you can get done and what can't be done. Because that's the philosophy. I like it.
Yeah. There you go.
Perfect. What's next for AgriWebb?
Yeah.
Future hold?
So we've talked a bit about, we're a global business and we're opening and attacking new markets. One thing that we're just on the cusp of now, which I find very exciting, which our team finds very exciting, which we get out of bed, every single day. We started this business not to get out, not to create, a better looking mousetrap, right? We get out of bed to really move the needle and impact farming, impact our food supply chain at scale. And a big part of what we do around that is on sustainability. right?
Okay.
And this is really around, as an industry, how are we reducing emissions, right? I mean, there's a lot out there around, cows are bad, stop eating beef, those types of things.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of education that needs to happen around the benefits of ruminants, the benefits of livestock production. What does that mean from a carbon emission, environmental sustainability perspective? Not that we've got time to go into that now, but
Yeah.
our strategy and our position around this is we're still the tool for the farmer, but what we have, and what the farmer has, is a whole bunch of data and a whole bunch of ways to improve. And
Yeah. Okay.
so we can then represent to the value chain, the supply chain, food companies out there, and we can work with them on their net zero targets, right? I mean, we're in an unbelievable time period right now where, you know, most of the corporates globally, the biggest companies in the world, the biggest food companies in the world, think of McDonald's, are making these goals and claims around we're going to be net zero by 2050 and we're going to reduce our emissions by 30% by 2030. So, basically every corporation out there has made these
Yeah.
sorts of claims and they have no idea how to solve for it. And in a lot of cases, they need to get back to what's called scope 3 emissions, which is the start of one's value or supply chain. And in food, in meat, that happens to be the farm, right?
Right. Yeah.
So a group like McDonald's, as an example, would say, well, we've never had to get, close to the farm because we make Big Macs, right? But now we do need to engage at a farm level and we need data to
Yeah.
prove that
Okay.
we're doing great by our goals and great by the environment. And so that for AgriWebb, that for our farming base is a huge opportunity to have impact at scale, impact for the world, impact for our population, and playing our part in how we do become more sustainable.
Yeah. That's awesome. John, thanks very much for joining us and sharing your story. And can't wait to see what happens next and how AgriWebb goes into the future.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me, Dion. It's been great.
Thanks, mate.